Ahla wa sahla. In this video, I want to talk to you about one little word in formal Arabic, and that word is qad. This is one of those words that can drive learners of Arabic to frustration if they try to look it up in a dictionary or if they encounter it in a text and its meaning is unclear, but it really has a limited number of very simple meanings, and those are what I want to try to articulate here. Qad has two basic meanings. The first enables us to say something like maybe, might, it is possible that, very similar to what we understand if we read min al-mumkin an in a formal Arabic text, or hear something like yimkin or mumkin in colloquial speech. Right? It gives that sense of possibility, of uncertainty. For example, if we wanted to say, I might study or I might go to the movies. That's a situation where we could use qad. And when we use qad to mean that, to imply that possibility and uncertainty, we always follow it with a present tense verb. So, I might study or I might go to the movies. We could render that as qad adrus أو قد أذهب إلى السينما. Maybe X, maybe Y, I'm not sure. The other main function of qad in modern standard Arabic is as an intensifier of completed actions. Think about the difference between I studied and I did study, or I have studied. Maybe if we're having an argument with someone about studying versus going to the movies and they say, you need to study, and you want to say, no, but I have studied, I did my studying. There's a case where we could use qad to mean it did happen, we have done it, something like that. And in that scenario, qad always needs to be followed by a past tense verb. So for I studied, we could get away with using just the conjugated verb, darastu. But for these, we might say qad darastu. It adds that additional flavor of finality or completion to what we're trying to say. Another example, if we want to say the meeting ended, you could say انتهى الاجتماع. But if for whatever reason we wanted to say the meeting has ended, we could just add qad to the beginning, and there it has that more intensive flavor of completion to it. The difference in meaning is slim, but sometimes it can be important, especially if we're having a back and forth about whether we can go to the movies once we've completed our study. Now, if we're translating for some reason from Arabic to English, depending on the context, we might not even need to translate that nuance. That non-intensive version in English might be more appropriate, depending on what we're trying to say, since the difference is very slim. However, sometimes it might add a certain essential rhythm, right? If we want to refer to that completion. One other thing I should mention is that sometimes for this intense completion version, we will see a version of qad where we have added a lam to the beginning of it. So the whole thing looks like this, and it's pronounced laqad. The difference is very, very slim. It's basically even more intense. Sometimes if someone's trying really hard to convey the literal flavor of the Arabic text, they might add that indeed, or verily, or truly, the meeting has ended. Verily, I have studied, something like that, but it can sound a little bit silly and archaic in English. Sometimes if you're translating an old text and you want to give that archaic flavor, it can give that boost of meaning. And other times, it might be appropriate to just skip that nuance of meaning entirely, since we don't have a really modern equivalent in English. There are times, though, when it might be appropriate. I think of the William Carlos Williams poem, written in English, that reads in the beginning, "I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox." Now, if we were trying to convey the information, you could just say, "I ate the plums in the icebox," right? But the author of this poem made deliberate choices that give a certain rhythm to the text. So if we were trying to say this, "I have eaten the plums," there would be a thoroughly appropriate point to say, لقد أكلت الخوخ. Which matches up very nicely with that sort of extra, "I have eaten." I did do it. And if we were translating this poem into Arabic, could give a little bit of pleasing rhythm to what we're trying to say. But the distinction in meaning between qad before a present tense verb, in the sense of maybe, possibly, and qad before a past tense verb, for this intense flavor, is pretty distinct. And the difference between qad and laqad as intensifiers is marginal at best. So, if we encounter qad or laqad in any of these situations, it should be pretty easy to figure out which category it falls into based on the presence of a present tense or past tense verb. And one final thing, if you look up laqad in a dictionary, you probably aren't going to find it because it is that combination of the preposition li and qad. So don't worry about that, don't spend your time doing that, just recognize that when we see qad, it pretty much is going to fall into one of those two categories in a modern text. Figure out which one it is, and then you should be good to go. But since qad and laqad appear absolutely everywhere in expository formal texts in Arabic, expository texts in Arabic, it's a really, really good word to have an active understanding of. Not just to allow your eyes to brush over it and hope that it's not important, but to really have a sense of which function it's fulfilling. And as learners of Arabic, qad and laqad are great ways to make our writing and formal discourse seem a little bit less like they're translated from our first languages and give them a more Arabic flavor.